Hello, folks. Good afternoon. Welcome to the last session of the day on communications and media relations strategy. Oh, great. Thanks, Kenneth. I appreciate that. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming for this, signing up for this session. A few things to start. Uh, Normally, when I do these, I like to have these be as interactive as possible. I much prefer a conversation than a lecture. That'll be a little weird with this format, but I'll try to keep my eye on the chat box as best I can. Uh, uh, but I'm a little unfamiliar with the software. I'm kind of a hammer and chisel and stone person, and men are famously poor multitaskers. So I ask you to be patient. Second, I realize that in this 1 hour that we have, we may not be able to get to all the questions you have, but I want you to know that please don't hesitate to email or call me at any time where something pops up. If this were a regular conference, we'd all be in a place and we can talk in the hallway or the lobby, or perhaps in a tavern if one existed nearby, where a lot of that meeting after the meeting can occur. But I don't want to cut off those opportunities just because we're virtual. So please, I'm very good with emails and calls. I'll share my information with you, and the door is always open. Texts are less good because I may not necessarily know what to do if I don't recognize the number. We'll move on. Let me see if I can share my screen here. I've got a bunch of slides that I'm going to try to share and talk through some of where we are. I tried to format this, not knowing where people are on the spectrum of dealing with the media and dealing with strategic communications, dealing with stakeholders. So I tried to design it so that no matter where you are, hopefully you'll come out with something that you hadn't known before. So let me try the sharing thing here and see how that goes. I assume that you're looking at a first slide that's got the conference logo on it. Can somebody just confirm that for me? Otherwise, I'll keep going. Or if you don't see a slide, let me know. That means I screwed something up. But anyway, this is the session. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, so you know who you're talking with. I've been in and around this business for about 35 years. I was an Associated Press government political reporter in New York. I served New York Governor George Pataki as his first press secretary, and I was also a senior policy aide, where I helped develop the charter school law in New York and implement it. I ran SUNY's authorizing office in its early days for its first 3 years, helped develop all our systems for application approval and school monitoring and accountability systems. I'm a founding board member of the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. Some of you might have heard my former colleague Greg Richmond at a session earlier today. I was a senior partner at a public affairs firm where I helped companies and nonprofits and organizations deal with political audiences. On the communication side, I was not a lobbyist. I spent 5 years on the board of the State University of New York. Some of you may know is the largest comprehensive public university system in the country. So I'm very familiar with public governance on a public body, which you all have to deal with. I spent some time at National Heritage Academies, which runs about 90 schools in 9 states, as their head of development and board relations. For the last 10 years, I've been an independent communications strategist, PR guy. I'm the board president of Troy Prep Charter School in Troy, New York, which is a K-12 run in partnership with Uncommon Schools. And last but not least, above all those things, I'm a husband and a father of 2 grown men. That's me. I have some hopes for today, which I've talked about a little bit. Maybe leave you smarter, wiser, and more strategic. Leave you better equipped to solve some problems, and hopefully learn some things from you. You know, I'm a consultant. You're doing the real work on the ground. Um, so I ask you to think about what some of your goals are from this session, and if they don't emerge in the course of this conversation, as I said, don't hesitate to share them down the road. I love being involved with people who are running schools and doing the real work. I spent too many years up in the to 10,000 foot level, sometimes higher. But schools are where it's at. In the charter world, I'm a acolyte of Joe Viterruti, a professor at Hunter College, who used to say that denying families school choice is like telling a child in a burning building that he can't get out. And I've thought about that a lot as the charter movement has grown, and people have continued to grow and run their schools. Is that you folks on the ground are the first responders and the firefighters running into each burning building and trying to pull a child out, and in some cases save their lives and certainly put them on the road to something better. Um, One thing, there's no such thing as a dumb question. There can be a dumb answer, but there's no such thing as a dumb question. So please don't hesitate to raise anything you want at any time over the course of the conversation. My focus here is on thinking, a little bit less on the structure of how to write a press release. Um, uh, but I'd like you to focus on here thinking about what goes into what you have to do uh, before you decide to embark on some kind of communications strategy. There's a quote from attributed to Abraham Lincoln that might have been said by a lot of people, which is, "If I had to cut down a tree, I'm going to spend 4 hours, 1 hour chopping and 4 hours sharpening the axe." This is the sharpening the axe step of the process. Um, I mean, I can't tell you how many people have called me up on given days and said, "Bob, I want to put out a press release because of this great thing we're doing." Or, "Can you help me get an op-ed in this paper about X?" And whenever this happens, I always suggest you take a step back and ask the simplest question in the world that every 5-year-old knows. Why? And then I asked a few more. So, with apologies to David Byrne, you may ask yourself a handful of questions. One is, why are you communicating in the first place? What's your end goal here? Sort of begin with the end in mind. What are the stories that you want to tell? Um, who are you trying to reach and why? Is it people in government? Is it parents for enrollment? Is it funders? Is it your staff? Is it the people who? Is it the community? Is it the school district? Have a very clear picture of uh, uh, who your audience is, and then what do you know about your audience? What insights do you have into how they feel about your school, or how they feel about you, or how they feel about the issues that you're trying to raise? What do you know about how they accept information? Do they read their weekly paper? Are they online? Are they on social media? Are they open to having their sensibilities challenged? How would you do that if that's what you wanted to do? Number five is, what reaction do you want them to have? As part of my work in the private sector, I've done some work with advertising agencies, and the first question they ask themselves when they start conceptualizing a campaign is, uh, uh, what do you want your audience to do once they have this information? And there's a whole range of reactions that we'll get into in a little bit. Um, but what you want? What do you want their response to be? Where along the action spectrum? What tools do you have? Do you have access to a newspaper, to a community newspaper, to a more general circulation newspaper? Do you know someone at the television station? Do you have video? Do you have parents who can speak on behalf of what you're doing? Do you have students who are willing to stand up and tell their story? So, like, what are the assets do we have? What do we know about the communication the environment in which we're communicating? What else is going on in the world? What tensions are there in the community that we're where we're trying to talk to people? What's the environment for charter schools uh, in the area where we're trying to work? Is it hostile? Is it friendly? And what does all this mean for how we go out there and deliver a message? Now, uh, this may sound familiar because it sounds to me like what you folks do in your schools every day. Um, when you go in with this is a sort of like a lesson plan, except it's a lesson plan concepts applied to an external communications exercise. Um, um, I say that because I don't want you to think that the communicating external communications or public relations is some kind of big black box. It is certainly a specialty, and it takes a knack and some experience before you get into it. But um, but it's possible to understand what's going on if you simply take the principles that you think about and apply in your school every day and put them to work here. Uh, uh, Another thing about communicating is communications is an additional function in your organization that's got to align with the overall organizational goals. It's a means to an end, but not an end in itself. Simply getting a story in the paper about your great violin program is nice, but it ought to have some other purpose beyond just getting in the paper. It's got to support the school's mission and all its other work. So that means, academics, talent management, enrollment management and marketing, advocacy, your parent engagement, the school's finances, the regulatory environment, dealing with the authorizer. Um, Comms thinks across an entire organization, and it has to be aligned with all of that. And if it's misaligned, it'll go awry. It's In places where it works well, it's consistent with the school's character and culture, right? It fits seamlessly into everything you do. When I worked in politics, we always tried very hard to make the candidate sound like him or her. Don't try to have them sound like something that they're not. So it's got to be consistent with tone, language, your style. Everything you do and say communicates who you are. In the marketing world, that's called your brand. I don't like that word because too many people tend to think it's a logo. But it's who you are and how the people who are important to you respond to you. My wife, who's a social worker by training, used to have a phrase that said, "Every interaction is a potential intervention," which I think in dealing with students and families. But it's the same principle applies in a communication strategy. Every chance you have to communicate with somebody who's important to you is a chance to bring them to your side. And it also models behavior for students and parents. Um, uh, Keep going. I'll keep going since I don't see anything in the chat box. So let's go to the first question, which is why communicate in the first place? A couple of simple reasons. One is tell something important about your school, right? So we want to inform them and educate them. If they're a reporter or somebody who's an influencer, we want to help them get it right for our benefit. We also want to persuade people, help them come over to our side. Two, we want to spur an action that builds our school, right? For communicating with parents, we want them to, or caregivers, we want them to enroll their child or their children. We're hoping people will contribute their time and or talent and or treasure for those of you who do private fundraising. We communicate for advocacy. We want people to pass good legislation and oppose bad legislation. We want to befriend people. We want third parties to endorse or validate our work. Um, I ask you to think about what some other reasons you might have on your own. Think on your own what other reasons why communicating externally would be valuable to you. One other one that pops up in my mind is to attract and retain talented people. Good teachers don't want to come work at a school with a bad reputation, and the more people who are important to you feel good about your school, the better chance it'll be that you'll be able to attract quality people. And as we know, for all the things about models and authorizing and letter and charters and policy stuff, good schools really come down to teaching and leadership. That's where the rubber meets the road. So in dealing with the media, talk a little bit about a reporter's job and our job, and which a lot of people don't really understand. And I knew that as I was a reporter. Sometimes I barely understood it. Uh, but their job, a reporter's job, is to try to get an interesting story. I never knew a reporter who didn't want a good story. So let me find something let me get a good story. What makes it good? Well, it has to be relevant, interesting, and timely. Two of those three can be good. All three of those is sort of the trifecta, which means it has to be relevant. It has to have some place in the current discussion, right? It's for a classic. For instance, I'll tell you how times will change. 2 years ago, if you had a school that was really doing a good job with remote learning and tech-based learning, people might not have been that interested in it. But come March and April, schools that had spent their time before the pandemic focusing on technology-based learning and how to use technology to teach in the classroom had a much easier time converting to remote learning once kids were sent home. And that becomes a highly relevant story as external conditions change. Two, it's got to be interesting. I mean, interesting is really, it can't be boring. It has to be something that captures somebody's imagination, and it's got to be timely. It has to matter now. If you want to, if you're trying to push a story about how creative your curriculum is, how creative your teaching system is, or your student culture theory, it's got to be fitting. It has to get a reporter's attention. They have to they have to see that that it matters now. Two, as part of that, is it's about people affected by issues and less about the issues themselves. Reporters like to talk to people who are really involved. You can have a great idea about it. You can have a tremendous professional development program, but they're going to want to talk to some teachers who have gone through it, who will endorse it and get their experiences, not just talk about different models of professional development and why theoretically ours is better as developed by some school of ed. They want good quotes, right? They want stories to be colorful and people to say things that they can't say themselves, but they feel should be said. And conflict is always nice. Conflict always makes news, and reporters will often try to create some if there isn't some inherent in the story. In a charter school's case, it might be, well, what does the school district think about that? Well, are you saying that the school district does it badly, right? They want to create some friction. A reporter's job is also not simply to accept what we say at face value, but they're there to challenge and push and probe and poke holes in your story. I always looked at a press release or an official announcement in part for what it said, but also for what was it not saying? What was it leaving out? How are they playing with the data to or framing the data in such a way that didn't tell the full story? So that's a bit of a reporter's job. It's a little confrontational, but we can also help them when we think we have something that they might like. Now, your job as the communicator is to deliver a simple message, right? It's the most important things first. Don't save your punchline to the end. Let them know right off the bat. This is the kind of story I have. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. We want to talk in human, personal terms, not academic terms, not theoretical terms. But we're in this business to help people kids get a better education so they can live a good life. And reporters are interested in things that are about humans. Your job is to prepare for questions and prepare for skepticism. We can't be successful if we're going to be offended anytime somebody asks us a challenging question. The fact is that's their job. Sam Donaldson, who was a legendary reporter for ABC News in the White House in the 80s and 90s, once said, it's not the questions that do the damage, it's the answers. Their job is to just ask. It doesn't mean that's what they think, but they know that people are going to ask them similar questions, and their job is to try to pull that out. The fourth thing here is talk about what you know. When we're out trying to tell a story to anybody, we should never speculate, never get pulled into areas where we're not experts or that are off topic for us. Talk about what we know. Lots of people are afraid to appear ignorant about something. Calvin Coolidge once said, I never got in trouble for not saying something. Stick to what you know and stay away from what you don't know. And if you get hit with something that you're not familiar with, it's fine to say that's not really my specialty. And the last one here is have a plan. Is to be intentional. This is a lot like the classroom. You have a plan going into a classroom every day, we hope, and is to have a plan on what you want to get out of this interaction with a reporter, and what you hope that they will know and do about the time it's over. Important to doing your job well and delivering a simple message is to have a key message, right? And we've heard that term. He was off message. She was off message. If you watch Meet the Press at the end of an interview, you'll hear somebody say, "What I really want you to understand is this," and then you get a soundbite. So every time we go into this, we ought to have a key message, not only with a reporter, but with a parent. I'm sure we all have it when we have a strategy when a parent comes in to talk to us about their children or their child. A key message is what we want our audience to know and remember, which really means it has to be three things. It has to be informative. It has to be fact-based, right? You can't just be making it up. A key message ought to be compelling and engaging. It ought to make an emotional connection. People decide what they like not based on features but on benefits, right? That's the old thing about why people buy washing machines. They don't care how many dials it has. What they want to know is it going to get my clothes clean? That's a benefit. You need to make an emotional connection with people to get them to stay with you. And it ought to be relevant. Why should they care? People have a million things on their mind. In the next one, I'm going to talk about the 1,000-to-1 rule, which is I learned from a colleague, which is the people we're talking to have 1,000 things on their mind every day. If we're lucky, one of them is the thing we think about all day. So to understand that there's always a competition for someone's attention and for their bandwidth. So anytime we're trying to deliver a message, it has to be relevant to them. And we have to think about why they should care, why they should listen. A key message is crisp, simple, and brief. It is direct and to the point. It is not meandering. It is plain language, right? It's easy to remember. It's supported by some key facts that can be sticky that people will remember, that are easy for people to comprehend. Uh, 55% of our kids are proficient in English, right? It's an easy thing for them to understand, as opposed to our fourth grade math program is six deviations better than the school district. Um, it's got to be key facts that are easy to grasp. It's never hazy and vague. And then understand we're in competition for people's attention all the time. Uh, Third aspect to a key message is that it can be written down on a piece of paper, and that's an interesting exercise, um, because we can see how long it is and see if it's meandering, if our hand starts to hurt, if we write it in longhand, or if we're typing too long to try to type it out. So it's easy to remember, easy to say. It starts with the single most important point. And I ask you to think about movie blurbs. Writing movie blurbs is a great little gift, right? Because in the old days, they'd have to fit on the back of a VHS tape box, right? So it'd be like 12 words. So we'll play a little game with apology in memory of the late great Alex Trebek, and here are a handful of little descriptions for famous movies, right? That are very tight, but you can see just from reading them, like you know exactly what the story is, right? A manipulative woman and a roguish man conduct a turbulent romance during the American Civil War and Reconstruction, right? If somebody knows what movie that is, just type it in, and if you don't, I'll just tell you. But obviously, it's Gone with the Wind, right? Second one is an untold story of three brilliant African American women working at NASA who are the brains behind one of the greatest operations in history. Hidden Figures. So you see these movie descriptions, you know, are very tight and very easy to understand and memorable. Now, these are real charter school stories that I've read or worked on, and you see how easy they are to describe. Right, a Holocaust survivor donates his violin to a Bronx charter school for use in its music program. Now, the violin is passed from student to student each year as a tribute. Uh, um, if you Google Joe's violin, you can see the story of that. But that was a story that involved a charter school I worked with, that had this remarkable thing happen to it, and it's a story that got national attention and local attention, and is one of the pride points, of the school. I alluded to the second one a few minutes ago. Charter schools' tech-based curriculum allows for a seamless transition to remote learning during the COVID shutdown. And this was a school in Yonkers that was totally ready, almost seamless, when schools in Westchester got shut down in March, because they had already used technology. Teachers were already conversant in it. They had used it in their lessons. Kids knew how to learn online. So when kids were home full time, it really wasn't a big adjustment. Parents were used to it, and that became an important story for the school once school shut down, and school districts, especially urban school districts, were having such a terrible time figuring out how to make this work because they got caught blindsided. Third one is a teacher nominated for a Grammy Award for the music program she developed at an all-girls charter school in nation's poorest congressional district. Right? Real sort of easy story to describe. You tell that to a reporter, they say, "I'm coming. I want to do that story. I want to talk to them." And then the fourth one is, charter school wages and wins a long court battle to force the school district to obey the law and pass on their funding. It's a simple thing that people can understand, and that's how stories one of the exercises in writing down what a story pitch might be is they've got to be able to be boiled down to something that's sort of concise and direct. Uh, if you'll notice, one of these is two sentences. They're both short, but they're all relatively short sentences that you could get out without a breath. Questions, concerns, comments? I'll keep going. Part of the magic here is keeping things simple. Martin Luther King said, knowledge is a process of piling up facts. Wisdom lies in simplification. And Pete Seeger said, any fool can make something complex. It takes a genius to make something simple. And that's the kind of stuff that educators do every day in the real world. I'm no math whiz, but I know that it's hard to master fractions without things like the lowest common denominator and simplifying them to their lowest. Now I can't think of the word, to the lowest components, right? So if we're talking about a school, we're talking about a curriculum, we're talking about the things that we're doing to anybody, we have to be able to boil it down, and that is sometimes a challenging exercise because we're all so close to it. Well, thank you, Dr. Boyd. I appreciate the. I'm glad the examples are useful. Thank you. A tip about how we approach the people that we're talking to. I worked with a friend once who said messaging, right, is like talking to your mother, right? And there are three things when you talk to your mother. One, we speak warmly because she's your mother. Two, your mom may be ignorant about what we're talking about, but she's not stupid, which means that if we find the words to explain it to her in terms she can understand, she'll get it. And then the third principle is moms always know when you're what? They always know when you're lying. So don't lie. Stick to the truth. Stick to things that are verifiable and things that are defensible. And as good as there's an old reporting phrase that says, "Never let the facts get in the way of a good story." Never let this. What I want to say is the reverse. Never let the story you want to tell. Never tell a story, no matter how good it is, if it can't be backed up, right? Because people will suss it out on you. The most successful national communications consultant I'd ever worked with, who worked on political campaigns all across the country and all across the world, and it helped companies all over the world, used to say these three things, and I couldn't believe it because they were incredibly simple. But all good communications need three essential things, which is a message, which is what you're saying, which we've talked about some of the components of there. They need a messenger who is saying it, and the messenger has to be appropriate for the message and appropriate for the audience, and has to have a message delivery system, right? How it's being delivered. All three legs on this stool have to be strong, right? And they've all got to be consistent and make sense. For instance, if you put an empathetic message in the mouth of a currently being diselected national political figure, no one will believe it because there's nothing about his character that says he's a sympathetic, empathetic person who expresses compassion for anything. Right? No matter how strong the message is or how top-notch delivery system is, if the messenger is off, it's off. It won't work. It'll be a miss. Again, if you could have an excellent messenger and a terrific message, but if if the message delivery system isn't the right one, if you are trying to, for instance, if you're a school in the Bronx and you're trying to enroll kids in the Bronx and you decide to take a half-page ad out in the New York Times, chances are that's not going to hit the audience you want it to hit. But if you take a half-page ad out in a Spanish language community newspaper, and buy an ad on bus shelters, that may work. And similarly, if you have an excellent messenger and the excellent message delivery system, but the message is all off, that's also going to fall flat. So these sound very simple, but they take thinking, and they take planning, and they take intentionality for them to work right. Kathy Bystrom said she missed the 1,000-to-1 rule. Can you repeat it? Yeah, the 1,000-to-1 rule, Kathy, is for the people that we're trying to reach. There are 1,000 things they think about all day. If we're lucky, one of them is the thing we think about all day, which is to say we need to have some perspective about what's claiming the attention of the audiences we're trying to reach. It's a little bit humbling, but we get so wrapped up in the things we're wrapped up in, and we're trying to talk to a reporter, or trying to talk to an elected official, or trying to get somebody's attention at a public meeting, or we're trying to write a fundraising letter. And we have to understand that people have a lot on their minds, and it may not be if we're lucky, one of them is the thing that we are so engrossed in. Does that help? So I'm nearing the end of this, and hopefully we can try to do some back and forth via the chat. Interestingly, for a business that is built around image, public relations can have a lousy reputation. So has its integrity questioned all the time. That's not the way I try to do it. I don't think that's the way people in the charter world try to do it. Some people certainly don't really care, but I think people, especially in independent schools, are the ones who are really putting their necks on the line every day. But a couple of definitions. Integrity is doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Right, and that's C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. The best definition I've ever heard of public relations is doing the right thing and getting caught at it. And that was coined by Ivy Ledbetter Lee, who was a PR pioneer in the early part of the 20th century and supposedly wrote the first news release. I'm wondering, the point I want to make here is that doing the right thing and doing the right thing is an act of integrity, and there's nothing wrong with getting caught at it if it's going to advance your organizational goals. I go back to that slide with all the intersecting colored lines. It's fine if no one's watching, but in the public world that we deal with, in running public schools, involved in public policy issues, dealing with members of the public, dealing with elected officials, dealing with authorizers who are all operating in public, doing the right thing, getting caught at it. Doing the right thing is an act of integrity, and there's nothing wrong with getting caught at it if it fits your agenda. I've worked with a network who only did media for enrollment purposes. They weren't interested in doing media work for policy or advocacy. All of that stuff was more below the line, but they were very interested in public relations for student enrollment. That was their strategy. Now we've got about 20 minutes to go. I'd like, if there are things that I went through that that you missed that you'd like me to go over again, if there are specific questions you have, um, uh, or if there are things you're dealing with that maybe we could work on together, I'd be happy to spend the time doing that. Also, just want to remind you all that um, that the offer to process some of these things goes beyond today. If there's ever something that's on your mind, or you need a run up by, or a gut check, or you're not sure about something, please don't hesitate to call or email. That goes for the 10 viewers who are here now, and anybody who might watch this later on. Um, I got involved in charter schools because it was a great. After all the things that had been tried and failed in trying to improve education for kids, I saw this as the one thing that might really work, because it was public. It was an option that relied on people's creativity and passion, and I've spent the last 25 years working on it, and from beneath the ground floor in New York, and I'm only too happy to help people if they think I can. Dr. Boyd, you said you have to tell your own story so others don't mistell it for you. Amen, doctor. We live in a competitive world, in the policy environment, and we deal with a lot of characters who would just as soon not have us exist. But if we don't tell the story about us, somebody will tell it for us, and chances are they'll tell it wrong or won't have our interests at heart when they tell it. Um, I'm glad you raised that, because it brings up a situation that happens a lot of times. Excuse me, when something goes wrong, or in a crisis situation, or um, uh, sometimes things will go wrong. Something will happen with a student, something will happen with a teacher, something will happen with a board member, and a lot of people will decide, well, the best thing we should, they think they're going to be like one of those caterpillar bugs, right? We should roll up in a little ball, and maybe it'll go away. And what happens in a situation like that is, silence is a vacuum, and it's going to be filled. It's going to be filled by, if it's filled by others, they're not going to be as, one, they'll be wrong because they won't have the facts. Two, it'll be filled by rumor or innuendo or speculation. And that's when we sort of lose control of the situation and the story. So it's especially important to tell your own story if you have a thing that goes wrong, even if you don't have to tell it beyond your parent community, even if it doesn't have to be something for the media. Um, uh, when something goes wrong, the first thing to do is gather all the facts and follow them wherever they may go. I've worked in the past couple of years. I worked with one school that hired a math coordinator and didn't do a good enough job checking out his background, and found out that he had been dismissed from his prior job for inappropriate texting with a student. And it never became a news story, but it certainly became something where they had liability on it, because those of us of a certain age can remember Watergate, and the two questions to dealing with a crisis or a negative situation all came out of Watergate, which is, one, what did you know and when did you know it? Right? You had this guy in our school, and how did you not know that he had this background? I hate to say it, but it took me 9 seconds on Google to find out what I needed to find out. Um, and the second lesson from Watergate is, it's not the crime, it's the cover up. and the clock on the cover up starts ticking the minute something happens. Um, uh, so those are one of those situations where uh, if something negative happens, if something happens with a teacher that you discover, or a student, it's important to get on it right away, because your most important constituencies, which is your kids and their parents, will find out about it and will want to know why you didn't do something about it sooner, or why you didn't tell them. So that's so Dr. Boyd, your 15-word sentence uh, is enormously pregnant for all the things it leads to. Um, uh, I like to say that things are either a strategy or an accident. Uh, and if we're going to decide to to not do something, or to not act, or to act a certain way, it ought to be part of a strategy. It ought to be part of, we have gamed out, we've done the chess match, we've gamed out uh, what what the ramifications might be. We have reasons and rationales and intention behind every decision that we make. Um, Sometimes things can go wrong because people didn't think about it. I feel like my job as a communications counselor is to be the pain in the neck of the room, to try to make sure that the people I work with think about everything, even stuff that makes no sense. Because if we learn one thing these days, is nothing's impossible. You can't say, well, that'll never happen, because everything can happen. Um, the line about fiction versus life is that fiction is limited to the things you can come up with, but life is not. And all those kinds of things happen in our schools. Um, Thoughts, questions? Do folks have things on their mind, or things they're wrestling with right now that they'd like to talk about, or from the group, or something they'd like me to talk some more about that I didn't? Well, okay, so let me talk for a minute about uh, sort of strategies for dealing with. Uh, okay, can you go back to the slide with the three things on there? Three things. Do you mean messenger, and message delivery system? Dr. Boyd, you mean these? Let's see if that's what she's thinking about. In the meantime, let me just talk about three sort of things to think about when you're when dealing with the news media. One is, okay, how do we talk about Dr. Alexandra Boyd from ASK Academy, or Ask Academy, says, how do we talk about procedural changes we have made based on survey data from students? uh, well, like any good consultant, I'm going to ask two hard questions. What are they, and why were they made? Are these about, academics? Are these about school discipline? They can. So one is, what are they? Why were they made? I would ask why we asked uh, why we held the survey. Do we always survey students on things in the school? Um, so it depends on what they are, but I would want to get to uh, what they are, why you made the changes, what the data said from the students. Um, I'd want to think about how the parents might react to the procedural changes. Oh, less homework. Um, well, I thought it was going to be stickier than that. Um, uh, I would. Well, one, I would want to know why. What's your homework philosophy? Um, so, Dr. Boyd says the survey was a social emotional check-in. Um, I would want to know what your homework philosophy is and why you changed it, and how will you continue to meet your how will you continue to help students meet your academic goals with less homework? Was it that you gave too much homework before? Like, was all of a sudden homework not needed? Are you doing something during the school day to minimize the homework? I mean, there's some drilling down that would have to happen, and I'm happy to talk to you about that offline if you want, without chewing up everybody else's time. But it sounds like you changed philosophy, and then I would want to know why you did that and what impact will that have on your students' ability to succeed academically. Um, and then also, what will be the social emotional benefits that you'll get from that, that you think will help students be more rounded, healthier, successful adults, right? I would also say, just as as an ex-news person and also a former student, I never knew a kid who thought who didn't think he had too much homework. So I'd also, want to question that. Am I, how do I know I'm not being gamed by students to get easier work? Which is, it's important to know where the parents are on this. Um, I'm glad that's helpful. Um, uh, the three ways to think about uh, how to be involved in news media. One is trying to do a proactive story, trying to create and push a story. So we have a cool thing happening at the school. We'd like to get a reporter in to see it. Um, uh, Say it's Hispanic Heritage Day. We have a Hispanic Heritage Day. We have some kind of cultural celebration where kids are very involved. We have a very diverse school. I've worked with a school that had multiple language spoken in it, and Cuban kids and Dominican kids and South American kids and Mexican kids and Puerto Rican kids, and they all had, kids from Central America. They all had their things that they did. So we created that story and we pushed it, and we had kids go out front. Um, uh, if you have kids doing an appearance at some political event, your band is playing, or your glee club is singing, or you're doing something at a annual celebration that a politician does. Something that's highly unique in the region, right? So that's a proactive thing. You create the story, you identify reporters you want to get interested in it, and then you have them come on the day. Um, uh, Another way to be involved in the media is to be reactive, right? As something happens and a reporter calls you, and says something happened. What do you think about this? The governor has decided to shut down all our schools, shut down every school in the state because of COVID. What do you think about that? Right? We're not in control. We're being approached. It's good to be helpful because for some reason a reporter has thought to call you, but it may not be a story that we want to get involved in because it's controversial. It doesn't fit into our organizational strategy. It may be negative. We may think governor made a stupid decision, or we just don't want to be involved. That's one thing that requires some finessing and some management. And then there's a third way, which is playing into an existing story. An issue arises, and something happens external to you, and you jump in. Like you reach out to a reporter and say, "Hey, I know you're covering this," or you put out a press release saying, this is going on. Here's what we're doing at our school about it. If you have, if is it, I'll make something up here. Say you have a high school with an outward bound program, and there's a story about kids being lost in the woods. Um, right? And everybody's wondering, these kids have been lost in the woods for 3 days. How are we going to find them? You have an outward bound program where, as part of the high school curriculum, kids are taught about how to navigate by stars and understand what kind of food they can eat, what kind of berries they can eat. I'm really making this up, but that might be a situation where you can call and go, look, this is a story that's going on. We have some kids you can talk to about how people their age might be able to survive in the woods for a couple of days. So there's that plane. That's being opportunistic about your media strategy. That's being opportunistic about your external communications that might help elevate the profile of your school and a program you have or a unique thing you're doing in ways you otherwise wouldn't have gotten, because the moment wasn't there. It wasn't timely or relevant to be talking about your outward bound program. So we've got about 2 minutes left. Kathy Bystrom, is that you're chiming in, cite data related to student mental health? That's for Dr. Boyd's question about social emotional check-in, I assume. Yeah, that's all. That's all part of the way to frame it, is that we understand the stress the kids are under. Homework is, too much homework is always a stressful thing. There might be other ways you can pull some data together to put the changes that you made in context. So that's a really good good chiming. Any other? I'm going to. Is there anything else that in the last minute and a half I should go back to in the slideshow that people would like me to emphasize a little bit, or any other questions, concerns, comments? I appreciate feedback. Please feel free to email me any feedback you have. Here, I'll go back to the slide that's got my contact information on it. Right here. Bob at Stanhope, STANHOPE-NY.com, or 518-928-8471. I'm located in upstate New York, in Albany, or outside Albany. I appreciate you all for coming. Thank you so much for the work you do. When I used to interview charter school boards, when I was the authorizer in New York, I used to say that I should tell them that my first job was as a newspaper reporter. So if I ask an obnoxious question, it's just a flashback. And then I would ask them if they were all nuts. But I think you've got to be a little out of your mind to do a great thing. And being involved in this kind of venture that puts your neck on the line for kids every day uh, is a little insane. But it's the it's the good. As John Lewis might say, it's good insane. So I appreciate you for what you're doing. Thank you so much for coming, and hope you have a useful rest of the conference and rest of the school year. Thanks.